Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Ranking the Albums. It's Sunday where you are, everybody. When we're talking, it's a rainy Saturday, at least here in the Hudson Valley. I don't know how's it going by you, Mr.
Uh,
Grant Arthur?
it's
Great house.
I don't know, it's not bad here, kind of overcast. No, actually the sun's out for God's sake. So we're
I think
blessed here in Central
you're going
Ohio.
to be sending it my way because today, man, I
Oh,
need my
move it
mark
out.
because we got flooding all over the place and it's a mess here in New York. But
Yeah.
whatever.
Ugh,
It's always
no
good.
good.
Yeah, it's always good. So we are going to be ranking at long last. We've been talking about this one for a long time. The great band Badfinger, one of the kind of strange oddities in the 70s rock music scene for lots of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. Their similarity to another band that folks might be familiar with, right? They were on the same record label. They've had lots of weird deaths in the store in their history, and some really good albums, a couple really great singles, and just overall a really cool band that I think is appealing to just about any rock music fan, right? Rock music lover, because they
Hmm.
do a little bit of this, they do a little, they can write a great pop song, they can do kind of garage rock, they can do hard rock, they can do soft rock, they can do yacht rock. They did a little bit of that towards the end.
They did.
Yeah, and some really talented singers and musicians and songwriters in this band. So
Yeah,
yeah,
the thing is I want to add is that this band tends to get the notoriety for inventing power pop,
yes,
which they do have power pop, but they're
oh,
just
yeah.
not a power pop band.
Not through and through. No,
Not through and through. There are power pop elements
yes,
and certain songs. Yeah, that's power pop, and that's one of the beginnings. The Raspberries, Big Star. There's a lot of bands around this whole same time period that did it. But Badfinger was pretty early. We're 70, 71. They might have been the inventor of that whole term power pop, even though we know Pete Townsend invented the term. But Badfinger kind of carried it through. There were a lot of those 60s bands that had that power pop element. But they
yeah.
are a lot more than power pop, ladies and gentlemen. I just want
True,
to.
yeah. As we'll kind of going through this catalog, because I'll be quite honest, I've had like a good chunk of these albums for many years, but it's been a while since I really seriously listened to Badfinger. So going through these albums again was a lot of fun, and yeah, they get oftentimes labeled with that whole power pop tag, and it's there. But there's
Yeah.
a lot of other stuff going on, but and it's hard. So I didn't mention the name, but it's hard not to talk about Badfinger and not mention the Beatles, right? Because there are a lot of similarities, especially early in this catalog, to the Fab
Hmm.
Four. Plus, there's the McCartney connection, there's the Apple connection, there's the George Harrison connection. So there's stuff going on here that will remind a lot of people of the Beatles early in the catalog. But as you get later into like the mid late 70s, you all of a sudden start to hear like I think the true identity of this band coming out, which I think is
Yeah.
really cool, right? But like I said earlier, unfortunately, we had some tragedy in this band, and I think they were just destined never to be around for a long period of time. But we'll get to all this as we go through it. So
Yeah,
we
because
got
I
10
do have a
albums.
question. I do have a question for you
Yeah.
later. I don't want to forget, but we get there, I'm going to ask you about something and get your input on something because I think it has a lot to do with why they were successful and why they weren't. But I'll ask it to you later as we get more into the rankings.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So we got 10 albums. Let's do two at a time, Grant. So why don't you kick
Okay,
us
two at
off
a
with
time.
10 and 9?
Well, this is great because my number 10 and number 9 go hand in hand. My number 10, before I go, I always want to explain this. My ranking could change. This is my particular ranking today. There's not a bad record in the Badfinger catalog, but all of these records have to end up somewhere.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. These are all great. I would not recommend any of them to anybody. This one I've got on CD. It's kind of a hard CD to find because this came out in the 90s and it seemed like it was in print for like a minute and then it was out of print. And I'm my number 10, I'm going to go with the Ivies Maybe Tomorrow. Now, this is a good record, don't get me wrong. This is Badfinger right before they changed their name. So when they got to the Magic Christian album, they changed their name. So, but this is Badfinger. So we're including it here. So we got Pete Ham, Tom Evans, Ron Griffiths, who plays bass. He does have a song on here that they end up doing on Magic Christian, but he was only on, well, he's only on 2 albums. So he's on this, and then we have Mike Gibbons, who's the drummer. The majority of this came out in 69. The majority of this record was re-released on the Magic Christian album that came out. God, it wasn't very long after this that it came
No.
out. Um,
A year later, I think. Yeah.
but it's funny when you listen to this, people tended to start comparing these guys to the Beatles, though I don't think, other than them being on Apple, they sound like the Beatles to some degree. There are always influences here, but I don't think the Beatles had anything to do with this record, really. This was produced by, well, Mal Evans, who was the Beatles' assistant. He's one of the producers, and Tony Visconti was the other producer. So the songs on here are strong, but when you listen to it, you really don't think so much Badfinger, no matter what. You think a lot of those later Badfinger songs. I don't think really Badfinger really came into their own yet. But I'm not saying this is a bad record by any means. It's a fine record. The sound quality on this is a bit muddy. By the time we get to Magic Christian, they use a lot of the songs off of here, but they remix it for better effect, and it sounds a lot better. But with this mix, the way things are, it really sounds like kind of like typical late 60s pop music.
Yeah.
There's no power pop on this. If everybody's thinking no matter what, that comes later. Yeah, this was the album Ron Griffiths was on. He was replaced by Joey Mullen, and then Tom Evans moved from guitar to bass, and then Joey's playing lead guitar, which was great. And that happened because of Neil Aspinall, which was yet part of the Beatles. What did Neil? He actually ran Apple. And it was his suggestion to make that transition, to get rid of Ron and get in Joey. But I think once they really got Joey in there, Pete, I think that's really what brought Badfinger together.
Yeah.
Joey Mullen, a great talent, wonderful guitar player, good songwriter, came really into his own as we kept going. But anyway, there's a lot of tracks that sound kind of like familiar songs of the past. Like I just wrote down, Yesterday Ain't Coming Back. Great track. It sounds to me like a cross between The Move and The Idle Race, and a little bit of Bee Gees, early Bee Gees on top. I don't hear any Beatle connections here, like people say, but I do hear The Move and The Idle Race, for God's sakes. Fisherman's a great song that they end up doing on Magic Christian. Acoustic bass ballad, very wonderful. Sounds like something off of FF Sorrow by Pretty Things to me. Little touch of Kinks on there gives you an idea if you like the Pretty Things and you know what I'm talking about. Very British sounding, a good track. Maybe Tomorrow sounds like classic Badfinger. You listen to Maybe Tomorrow, you're going, yeah, I get that. I get that. Strong harmonies, nice string arrangements, but it's still not power pop. And like I said, they're more than power pop. Tom Evans' vocals on this sounds kind of like, if you're familiar with the Small Faces, kind of like Steve Marriott, not the humble pie Steve Marriott, but Small Faces Steve Marriott before he blew out his voice. Sally Blue, Sally Blue, Sally Blow, Sally Blue. Pete Hamrocker is the second track on side 2. What a way to start off side 2. Yeah. Great rocker. It's a decent record. I have no real issues with it, but they have to go somewhere. My number 9, I'm going to go with Magic Christian. Like I said, a lot of the elements from the Ivy song albums on here, but now you've brought Paul McCartney on, which has produced 3 songs. He brings in the song Come and Get It, which leads off the whole album. Classic. It's a classic. Even though the Beatles didn't record it and they're for real, you can tell the Beatles are all over. So that might be where that whole Beatle thing came in. So we've got, so Magic Christian basically features 3 new Badfinger songs, some of the Ivy songs, and you've got, those songs by Paul McCartney. The remix really helps the Ivy's tracks. And then even though there are some songs on here that are later, I think they fit right in. Makes the album better. That's why I'm ranking it up one from my number 10, which is the Ivy's album. I think it's fine. But when we get Joey Mullen on the next record, I think that's where things really started to gel. Not a bad record at all.
And a really cool album cover, right?
Oh, it's a great album cover.
For years, I always thought that was a Hypnosis cover, but it's not.
No.
It kind of looks like it could be.
And then see, you've got the three band members because I think Ron, by the time this came out, Ron was out. We still haven't had Joey in the band yet. So
Right.
Joey's not on this.
And I will say, and we'll talk about it a lot today going forward. Pete Ham and Joey Molland made for a great guitar team.
Oh,
Both guys really talented. There's really good guitar playing on these albums. Really
pe-
good.
people don't really recognize it, but if you listen to these records, the guitar sounds on this, in fact, yeah, their interplay is really inspiring and great.
Yeah.
They bounce off each other. The whole band, but when we got Joey in there, everything really just kind of gelled together. But yeah,
Yeah.
great guitar playing on those records.
Yeah. All right. So my number 10, I'm gonna go, and Grant, if you could hold it up,
I'll be ready.
1979's Airwaves, their eighth album. All right, there you go. This is their first in 5 years. So it was a big break here. And now the band is on Elektra Records, right? So they did a
Yep.
little moving around, went from Apple to Warner Brothers to Elektra. And they had another album, which we'll talk about, which was recorded like 5 years before, which was going to be released on Warner Brothers, and it never came out. That we'll get to that in a little bit. But now, what's really interesting about this album is that it's called Badfinger. I don't think the guys actually wanted to be a Badfinger
Mm-mm.
because it was really just Tom Evans and Joey Molland. That
Mhm.
was just those two guys. But the record label was like, well, you can't. It's not going to fly unless you call it Badfinger,
Right.
right? So,
Yep.
and there's a shit ton of different studio musicians on here. So there's like a who's who of people that were prominent at the time doing all sorts of sessions on here, and produced by David Malloy, right? It's a very slick sounding record. 1979, not surprising, right? A lot of these 70s bands, as they were moving into the 80s, kind of changing to, disco and all this kind of stuff. So it's not surprising. Um, but to me, it still does sound like Badfinger, I think, for the most part.
Oh yeah.
Um, Lost Inside Your Love is a terrific pop song. It's got strings, and again, another very important aspect of a lot of productions in this time period. Using kind of strings and rock music. And I think it really works. It works. Nice guitar solo there. Lookout California. That's kind of generic to my ears. I'm not crazy about that. Love Is Gonna Come. That's a pretty good rocker. I like that. You got a little bit of disco beats on Sympathy. Again, indicative of the times. I don't hate it. The Winner. So we mentioned yacht rock before. The Winner is a total AOR yacht rock song.
Yep.
And again, if you like that sort of thing, here you go. It's great. I don't like The Dreamer much. Come Down Hard is a good rocker. I really like that. And Sail Away, kind of forgettable. For me, I mean, this album is so short. It's like what, 31 minutes? Really
It's
short.
I think it's 33 minutes long.
33. All right. So my math is always terrible. So for me, I think there's a couple good songs. The other songs to me are kind of forgettable, but overall, as a way to experience the whole story of this band, you kind of have to get it and immerse yourself in it, because I think it just kind of shows you where those two guys were at the time, trying to keep the spirit of what made Badfinger such a great band together. For me, it doesn't all work, but there's enough notable stuff on here. But it's my number 10. And my number 9 is going to be their next one, which is Say No More from 1981. So that's their ninth album, technically their last new
Yeah.
production of the time, because their 10th album is actually the forgotten one, which we'll talk about. So there you go. So it's the last kind of reunion album. Again, it's still only Tom and Joey, but you got on keyboards, you got Mr. Tony K from Yes, right?
Yeah.
What? Sure, why not? A guy named Glenn Sherba on guitar and Richard Bryans on drums. What I like about this album, I don't think I think the songs are a little better than the previous album, but I think this album really rocks in spots. This is
Hmm.
a pretty good kind of garagey rock album in spots. I Got You is kind of weird. That's kind of like rockabilly. That I don't really care for that one too much, but I like Come On, which has it's kind of like barroom boogie type of thing. That's the one thing. You got Tony K on this album, but instead of him contributing a lot of like organ, which that's what he always did in Yes, he's playing a lot of like
Yeah.
kind of honky tonk piano, which is
Yeah.
weird, but it's cool. It's different, right? Hold On is a total fun power pop track. I really like that one a lot. Might be my favorite song on the album. I think Because I Love You harkens back to their earlier stuff where they're kind of trying these kind of Beatles style
Hmm.
harmonies, which really are, Badfinger style harmonies. I really like that. That's pretty good. Rock and Roll Contract is great. Good hard rocker. Yeah, that's another
I
one of the
love
great
that
ones.
song.
Oh
I
yeah,
love that song on Head First, and I love it on here.
yeah.
And we'll talk about it, but man, what a killer song.
It's a killer song, and the vocal harmonies are outstanding. And that's the one thing which you're going to hear from both of us a lot today in talking about these songs and albums. These guys were masters at creating these multi-track vocal harmonies because, like, almost the entire band sang, right? So you had these two or three
Mhm.
lead singers. It worked out really well. Love Passing Time is good, and then Crocodile is also pretty cool. There's a lot of songs on this album, a lot more than the previous one. Not all of again, not all of it works for me, but I think this album is of the last two is the stronger of the two. To me, it's arguably better than Airwaves, but your mileage may vary. I think they're, like I said, they're both noteworthy if you're gonna explore this catalog. For me, I would save these kind of for the last. Grant may disagree. I think he's going to, but that's okay. So that's my
Well,
10 and my number 9.
like I said, I was tossing these back and forth. I was arranging, rearranging, and the more I listened to those two bad, the two last albums, call them Badfinger or not, I don't know. It just got a hold of me. Um, but anyway, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. So my next one, let me flip to the next thing. Okay. Okay. Well, it's funny you should mention that, for God's sakes. Well, actually, it's not that. We are going to go with God, people don't be mad, but I'm going to go with my number eight's going to be Ass.
Woo! Okay.
Well, but you
Right.
have to understand my reasoning behind it. Okay. This is the record. Todd Rundgren was supposed to produce this. He only made it through two songs before they abandoned him and Chris Thomas took over. Chris Thomas, love Chris Thomas, don't get me wrong. He produced a lot of that later Badfinger catalog. Produced the Pretenders, produced the Sex Pistols. We know his work, great producer. I'm not saying anything about it. But Todd only made it through two songs, which I wish Todd would have finished it up, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Recording started out early in 72, um, right after they did Straight Up. Now, the thing that you'll find in the history of Badfinger, which I think was detrimental to them, is that they were really pushed by their management to just keep cranking, keep
Yeah.
cranking. They would produce an album and we got to get you right back in the studio. They signed to Warner Brothers. Managers going, we need to get you right back in the studio. And then they're just constantly cranking. They could never get a break. They could never really have time to write songs, but they really did rally really well.
Yeah.
So,
That is definitely true. If you were, I didn't jot all the release dates down, but if you go and look at the release dates of all these albums,
bang,
there
bang,
ain't much
bang.
time between them. They were cranking them out in the span of like what, 4 years, basically,
Yeah,
right? I
it's
mean,
nuts. But they had a lot of production issues. They had a publishing copyright issues with their company.
yeah,
So, just real quick, when Joey Mullen came to the band, he didn't sign a contract with Apple. Apple handled their publishing. He did not sign the contract. He wasn't part of it. So when the rest of the band had an issue with Apple, well, this was their last album for Apple before they went to Warner Brothers. So there was I don't know, upheaval. There's upheaval at the record label. So on this record, most of the songs are by Joey Mullen because he wasn't attached to Apple. Okay. We only get two Pete Ham songs on here. It's mostly a Joey record. You do get you get some Tom Evans, but it's not quite, I don't know. This album was made under distress. They weren't really in the right mind right here. And there's no obvious hit singles. There's a couple of songs here that I think are great. Is this a contractual album? Depends on how you look at it. Some people love this record. I've seen rankings where they put this one way up there. I don't see it so much. I just
spoiler
listen to it.
alert.
Okay. I just kind of makes me sad. This record kind of makes me sad. Got the Apple of My Eye, Pete Ham, which is a great track. I think he was bittersweet about the break with Warner Brothers. Obviously, he's writing songs about it. He's conflicted, it's like a kiss off to Apple. I don't know. He
Well, they
just doesn't
look
seem
pretty
like it.
happy though, Grant. Look at that, right? They look pretty
Well,
happy.
well, it's probably the drugs. But it's a great song. We got Getaway Joey Mullen, Good Rocker from Joey. Icicles is another Joey song. It's Joey, Joey, Joey.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that. I don't think Joey's songwriting here is as good as it's going to get. I think later on, and I might mention this, cough, cough, but I think Joey on this is kicking. Um, the songs are okay, but to me, it just sounds like the band's wore out. They're fighting with everybody. They're leaving the record company. They're going to Warner Brothers. They just sound stressed, but maybe some people may see that. Constitution by Joey Mullen's very heavy, almost Hendrix-like. I mean, I wrote on my notes, I said, this really is a Joey Mullen album to me. When I Say is a Tom Evans song, I didn't really write anything about that. Cowboys, Mike Gibbons. Mike throws out a song there. I like to see Mike trying to do something. That's good. And then Timeless ends the record, and that's your only other Pete Ham song. There's very little Pete. You can hear him singing on the backgrounds.
Yep.
And I do want to say that when you mentioned like Airwaves and gosh, I'm at blanking out the final record, Never Say Goodbye.
Yep.
That's what you miss. Because even though Joey and Tom can handle the vocal harmonies, you miss that third part by Pete Ham. And think about if you added Pete to those later records. Be so good. But yeah, this record, I don't dislike it, but I think there are better records coming up. And I think if Todd Rundgren could have produced it, he's a taskmaster. He's Chris Thomas is a little bit more passive. He'd rather go down an artsy. Oh, there we go. He'd rather go down an artsier route. And Todd's is going, this is what we need to do. Let's record this in 2 weeks. Do this, and look at that. He produces greatness. I will say that. So that's my number 8. Now I'm going to go to my number 7, which is Say No More, 1981. The band on here, Pete mentioned Tony Kaye, and Tony Kaye is the one who put the backing band together for this record. Like Pete said, Airwaves is mostly studio musicians. I don't think you can really tell, but yeah, this is really more of a solid band effort. So you've got Joey Mullen and Tom Evans and Tony Kaye. Richard Brines is the drummer and guitar player Glenn Sherba. My notes here, I wrote about, let me see, Because I Love You. Power pop, sounds like the Raspberries, sounds like the Beatles on that one. And I'm not taking anything away from it. I love it. I think it's great.
It's a really good song. Yeah.
It's a good song. This album does rock more than Airwaves, like Pete said. It did have a hit single. Hold On I think it went to number 56 in the US. And I'm listening to that track. I'm going, yeah, I guess that could be a hit single. I don't think it should have hit any harder than what it did. 56 seems fair for it. The album only reached to 155 on the Billboard chart. People didn't care about Badfinger at this point.
Not in 1981.
They didn't care. Hey, I like the record. Rock and Roll Contract, which we mentioned before, is absolutely brilliant. It's more fleshed out here. It's a little bit slicker. It's not quite as heavy as it is on Head First. But God, thank God that got a real release, on this record. Great record. Joey and Tom are pretty much writing equally on this record. I don't think I don't think it's as accessible as Airwaves. But after several listens, I think this album opens up quite a bit. I Got You's a great opening rocker, kind of like Rock Pile. If anybody knows Nick Lowe and, that band, kind of like Rock Pile. But there's no power pop opening it up. Come On's excellent Tom Evans track, reminds me of Slade, kind of a catchy riff. Hold On, great power pop single, great harmonies. Tony Kaye, I want to hand it to Tony Kaye for hitting it out of the park. It's nice to hear him play piano.
Yeah,
I mean, he can play.
Yeah, because you don't hear him do that
He
too
can
often.
play. And like I said, rock and roll contract classic. Passing Times, a Joey Rocker, killer guitar, killer harmonies. I love it. Three-time loser, another Joey track. Very much sounds like Badfinger. Very much so. I would love to hear Pete Ham singing on this record. I think it would have helped it. I think probably what kills these two records is that people can't get over the fact that Pete Ham's not a part of it. And I think that's what people look and go, well, it can't be Badfinger without Pete Ham. Well, it is. I mean, it's that on paper, so I'm going to have
Not
to
like
say
he
it's
had a choice to
Badfinger.
take part or not, right? He wasn't with us
No,
any longer, right?
but
So
I just think Pete that if he could have been here, how great it would have been.
yeah.
You mentioned Crocodillo, great track. No More's yet another Joey Mullen rocker. It's very well balanced between both of them. I love the harmonies. I don't have a problem with it. I think this is a stronger album than Ass just because I think they're more inspired here. I know that they were having some issues, some band issues. This is probably why this was the last record. They weren't totally getting along. There's a lot of pranking going on. I don't. I'd have to read the Badfinger book, but I think it's a decent record. It doesn't show that they sound like they're in a crisis or anything. Just good rock and roll when I hear it, and I think there's a lot of good power pop on it. So that would be my number 7.
Cool. My number 8. I'm gonna go with Head First. And so again, weird. There's a weird history here. It's their
Yeah.
10th and final album, but it was actually recorded back in 1975. There you go. Officially released, I guess, in 2000. It's seen a couple different releases here and there.
Yeah.
So recorded in 75. Warner Brothers decided not to release it they were having all sorts of issues with the band. The band themselves were fighting with each other, people coming and going. It just wasn't a good time at all in the history of Badfinger. They weren't getting along with each other, weren't getting along with the record label. So here this album sat for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So what happens? They finish the album, they're just all sitting around, and Pete Ham commits suicide. It's just like, right there, the kind of the death knell of the band. Proved to be, 5 years later they came back, but at the time, just a terrible, terrible time in the band. So here you got the guy named Bob Jackson had come into the band to replace Joey, all right, who left right before they went to the studio. So this is a Joey-less album. So you have that right there. But there are some good songs on here. Lay Me Down. It's a really good number. Really good. I'd qualify that as power pop. Just good, catchy,
Oh.
upbeat, just really good track. Hey, Mr. Manager, really catchy. I like that a lot. Keep Believing is a terrific song as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great pop song, great vocals. Past Fast is a good rocker, great lead guitar on there. Just Pete Ham delivering some good stuff. I'm pretty sure that was Pete Ham, I think, who did a lot of lead guitar work on this album, I think, or was it Bob Jackson who did? I don't know.
It was Bob.
Was Bob? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Moonshine, kind of bluesy. That's okay. Turn Around, excellent song. Excellent song. I love the organ on there. That they would use Hammond organ or whatever kind of organ, Farfisa organ, in spots on a lot of these albums to nice effect. They didn't overuse it though. And I think that song, Turn Around, reminds me of Spooky Tooth and Traffic a little bit. What I don't like about the album is that some tracks sound a little unfinished, I guess. Or like trying to figure out, you got someone new in the band, you got the issues going around within the band. Like there seems to be a slight lack of focus on some of the tracks, but what the stuff that's good on here is really, really good.
Really good.
And like I said, you have a very cool version of the track that we mentioned from the other album they re-recorded for later on. But like I said, this is a really good album. I would urge anybody to get a hold of this. It's kind of the forgotten Badfinger album, but it's definitely,
It's not cheap.
No, that's why I don't have a copy, right? Because I waited too long to try and hunt this down. But yeah, but it's easy to go out and listen, your various places where they have it on the net, so you can go check it out. Definitely really cool stuff, though. That's my number 8. And my number 7, I'm going to go with, hold on, let me grab it. Wish You Were Here from 1974. It's their 7th album. Again, Chris Thomas producing for Warner Brothers Records. You got a great song called Just a Chance. Here they are. Great picture of the band.
Yeah.
You got it's a kind of a weird album, right? You see album cover, you got all this kind of interesting stuff here. Just a Chance is a really good, upbeat, hard rocker. Lead guitars everywhere. Like I said, these two cats, man, Pete and Joey, really good players.
Yep.
Really good players. And you got Mike Gibbons, who a very underrated drummer, I think. Just very steady in the pocket kind of drummer, keeps everything held together. There you go. It's great shots there. Uh, you know, they dabbled a little bit here and there, and kind of like what I call country rock. Like You're So Fine is kind of like that. I'm not as crazy about that stuff for them. To me, what I always appreciate about this band is that they tried to do lots of different things. And country rock was kind of very popular at the time, so I'm not surprised when they did that. It's not really my favorite aspect or style of this band, but that's just me. Got to Get Out of Here. It's got some really nice organ. Again, that organ pops up every now and then on their songs, which I really like. No One Knows is a great hooky rocker. Again, classic Badfinger. Love the vocals on that. Dennis, brooding, but still very cool, appealing pop.
Yeah.
Love that. Love the vocal harmonies. Love the piano. Really nicely done. And then, and I know because I know Grant's gonna have a lot to say about this one too. You got In the Meantime, Some Other Time is this big, lengthy, out of nowhere prog rocker with all of this atmosphere and lead guitars and strings and keyboards and just like, where did this come from? Like,
Where did this come from?
right? They didn't do this kind of stuff, but it works so well. It's my favorite song on the album. I think it's
It's it's Pete, it's absolutely brilliant.
yeah, and it's like you wouldn't expect that from this band at all.
I'm gonna add, to me when I hear it, it sounds like the level of prog, like, well, it's proggy, but like Supertramp, and you throw a little bit of 10cc in there.
Yeah,
With Badfinger. I don't know how to explain it.
it's just them experimenting, right? And I think it
Yeah,
really works. It really works.
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, there's other good stuff on here. Love Time, that's kind of schmaltzy for me. I'm not a big fan of that, but the guitar solo is good. King of the Load is really good. I like that. Meanwhile, Back at the Ranch, Should I Smoke? That's kind of like blues rock. Why not? Good song. I think for me, the album itself is a little uneven, but I think again, what's really good here is really good. And then God, a year later, Pete is gone, right? So this is kind of like, almost like he's on the other record, right? But this is almost like the last stand of him as a living, active member of Badfinger, I think, at the time, right? So yeah, good stuff. You got to have it if you're into this catalog, right? Because it's one of their,
Yeah, it was, since they were in such a mess with Warner Brothers. I mean, literally it came out, Warner Brothers pulled it. And they were in the studio at the same time. Remember we were talking about, they just make them go right back in the studio.
Yeah.
They were back in the studio before I think it was even out.
Yeah.
And they were having all Badfinger had were problems. They had problems with Warner Brothers, and they pulled Wish You Were Here out of the stores. In fact, if you can find an original album of it, good luck. And then that's why, well, you talked about Head First. We're going to go all over. You remember you're talking how Head First feels unfinished.
Yeah.
Because what we're presented with on Head First is just a basic rough mix. They never did the final mix on it.
It's demos, basically. Yeah, pretty much.
Look at it like that. But I mean, they were going to sweeten it up. But, once they pull the plug on them, sat on the shelf.
Here's what you got. It's just sitting in the vaults for all those years.
There is no other band in history as sad as Badfinger. They had the worst luck.
And I haven't read any biographies on them, but wasn't there a good amount of drug abuse going on in this band as well?
I would imagine. Yeah, I think so. Like, I think there was quite a bit on Wish You Were Here, to be honest. I think they were a mess. Yeah. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'm at my number 6, right?
6, yeah.
Keep me in line, Pete. Keep me in line.
All right.
Number 6, I'm going to go with Airways from 1979. Our ranking on this show is never good. It might end up the same when we get up higher, but this just goes to show you what a great catalog Badfinger has. Because look, this is my number 6, and this was Pete's 10.
Yep.
Not a bad record in the lot. Um, Tom Evans and Mullen on this record, great vocals. I mentioned before I miss Pete Ham, but they do a great job together. They sound like Badfinger. Sounds like 1970s Badfinger.
Yeah.
You mentioned this album's a bit slicker. I don't know. I don't see so much slickness as opposed to being better recording. I think it sounds great. They also had another single off this record, "Love Is Gonna Come at Last," which reached number 69. I think it's got great songs, great production. I think it's a gem. The more you listen to it, the more this record opens up and just supplies you with musical bliss. Um, and there's a lot of power pop on this record. So if you're looking for power pop Badfinger, there's a lot of jangly guitars. There's a lot of just overdriven guitars, not real, that whole power pop sound with great harmonies and great guitar sounds and great hooks. I love this record. Airwaves is kind of like a short acoustic ditty but it goes right into the next track, Bang Bang. I'm not sure, but Lookout California, Pete wasn't too impressed with it, but the guitars on this record sound phenomenal. I guess what I could describe Lookout California as being is kind of like if you took the WKRP and Cincinnati theme and a little California man from The Move and the Cheap Trick, put them together, it's kind of what you'd get. Tom's vocals on here are great, power pop at its best. I must mention the guitar player on here, Joe Tansen. I'm not really familiar with his work, but I am pretty sure he's doing well, no, I take that back. On Lookout California, Joey's playing the lead on here. It's great. But I think with him and Joe playing together, I love it. Backing vocals are all great. Lost Inside Your Love, I'm going to go on record. And people may go, great, you're absolutely out of your gourd. This is a Tom Evans song, but I think this is a good a ballad that anything Pete Ham ever produced to me. Kind of reminds me of Jellyfish. I think Jellyfish listened to a lot of this record and took a lot from it, to be honest.
Okay.
I can't prove that. It's just what I hear. But this is a great ballad. It sounds great. The backing vocals between Joey and Tom, I love it. Your love is gonna come at. Say that real fast. It doesn't make sense.
Come at you, love it. It doesn't. It's like it's missing a word at the end.
But Rickenbacker 12-string jangle, you like 12-string. Joey's guitars sound great. It's jangly. It's power poppy. Andy Newmark's playing drums. It sounds great. Again, the vocals are great. I love this whole damn record. I can't help it. Sympathy, I think the song, Pete, not a big fan of Sympathy, but I like it. It's got that witchy woman type of intro, but then after that, it becomes heavier. I think the song smokes. And again, I keep mentioning that blend of Tommy and Joey. I love it. And I do want to mention the lead guitar on this track. Joe Tansen's playing the lead guitar and it smokes. You like guitar, it's great. Winner, more power pop. I like it. I could go on and on and on and on about it, but it was going to rate lower, ladies and gentlemen, but now I've rated it all the way up here. I don't know why. It's where it's landing today. I really like it. If you're into power pop, highly recommend this record because I think it's very underrated in the power pop community. I can't prove that, but no one really talks about it. These later Badfinger albums just kind of,
they fall by the wayside. Yeah.
So there you go. I went on a rant on that record, for God's sakes. My number 5, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go with the Badfinger album from 1974. Chris Thomas produced this gem. And you know how we were talking about how these records are coming out. That this was released less than 3 months after Ass. Now, how can anybody on the planet really produce a record in 3 months and really have top quality material?
And switching record labels in that time period.
Yeah. Chris Thomas is back on board.
Yeah.
I think they like Chris because he's a little bit more passive. Todd, the taskmaster. Chris Thomas, not so much. But this album, maybe it's because they're on a new label. Sounds a lot more livelier than Ass to me. Um, Unfortunately, this record did poorly in the States. It only got to 161. It lowest charting album they ever had, I believe, right here. Maybe it was the artwork. I don't know.
Yeah,
But when you listen to it, I don't think it's a bad record for something that was rushed out, Pete. I don't think it's bad at all. I Miss You is a Raspberries type ballad.
yeah,
Anybody familiar with Eric Carmen? Rest in peace, Eric Carmen. Brilliant songwriter and musician. This, if you like the Raspberries, this is right up your alley. I think it's a wonderful song. Shine On. I didn't really write much about that. Lowest song for a lost friend, jangly power pop, and a great guitar solo. Pete Ham, after taking his break on Ass, really comes through on this record, I think.
yeah.
This is much more of a Pete Ham album to me. Why Don't We Talk is Tom Evans' song, great. Island, Joey and the Rockers, Pete.
Yeah.
He is like the rocker in the whole band because Island's a great, great song and it rocks. Um, Matted Spam. Okay, here we go. This is kind of funky. We mentioned on that on Wish You Were Here, they're playing prog. They're playing funk on here.
Got
We've got
horns and yeah, all sorts of cool stuff.
funk
Yeah.
guitar.
Yeah.
Pete Ham song. Pete is Ham. He's all over this record, and I love it. Love Pete Ham. He was to me, he really was Badfinger to some degree. When you
The heart
think
and soul, right?
the
Yeah.
heart and soul and the tone of Badfinger, because you hear Pete Ham's vocals and you immediately go, "Oh, Badfinger." Yeah, he's the heart and soul, but he's here. This is why I rated it so high because it's. I think this album gets a lot of flack that it's kind of half baked, but I don't really hear that. I think it's a good record. Where do we go from here's Tom Evans? Catchy. It's a keyboard bass track, catchy chorus and verses. I think it's decent. It's got a bit of a Caribbean flair with that steel drum.
Mhm.
And I think it goes back to when I was saying Chris Thomas likes to put in all these different flourishes. Yeah, let's make it a little bit more interesting for the listener.
Why not?
I don't have a problem. My heart goes out, Mike Gibbons, very folky. I think it's all right. I could keep going on. I think you get the idea. Um, I think maybe it's not as cohesive as some of the later records,
I would
but I
agree.
think there are fine tracks though. Maybe it could have used Todd Rundgren again. I'm sorry, I'm not a. I'm hey, he knew what to do. I'm just going to say that. And it kind of sounds. I don't know. I just don't. I just want to say that it's hard to believe that Chris Thomas had his hand in both Ass and here because they really don't sound have anything in common. He's the producer, but they're totally two different records.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's weird, but it is what it is. Again, this Pete Ham songs on here rise above everything else, and maybe that's why I think it sounds like it needs some more focus because Pete is contributing such great material. I mean, come on. I'm just saying. Maybe that was it. Just a theory. Don't know. We'll hear what you have to say.
And I'm going to say it right now because
Oh,
that's a great lead into my number six. And it's
okay.
yeah. This is a very good album. It's a little uneven, but I think for me, the unevenness
Is that a word?
comes from I don't know, is that even a word? I don't know. It comes from the fact that I think they seem to like they're trying too hard to throw in a lot of different things here that can work for you or against you, right? And I'm
Right.
not saying it's definitely in the negative zone on this because I think it's nice to have variety. You know, you mentioned the funky part, right, from Matted Spam. I think that's terrific. You mentioned My Heart Goes Out. I get a little Celtic folk on that, right? So
Okay.
there's the Celtic feel, right?
There you go.
Then you got, which I don't know how they didn't release this as a single, but Lonely You is terrific. That's like one of the best examples of dreamy, floating pop that you'll ever hear. The chorus is so memorable. It's got great little guitar licks and the vocal harmonies and that organ. there's cool keyboards on this album. This is not really a keyboard band, but there's some really cool stuff going on here.
Mhm.
I Miss You also has some really nice piano and organ as well. Really good stuff. Um, Andy Norris is like big up tempo, hard
Rocker.
rocking boogie rock, right? What?
Yeah.
So there's that. Song for a Lost Friend is kind of like Beatles-ish. Why Don't We Talk? Another kind of really cool power pop vocal harmonies like the Beatles. I mean, there's some really good stuff on here,
Yeah.
but it's like this. It's all over the place.
Mhm.
But I think it's good. There's even some like country stuff on like Shine On. I'm not a big fan of that song. That's again more that kind of like country rock thing going. But you're absolutely right. Pete's stamp is all over this album.
Mhm.
I think it's a really good album. It's a really, really solid record for them. It's right about the midway point for me, but you can't go wrong with this. That's my number six. And my number five is going to be, let's see, what is my number five? Okay, my number five is going to be the Ivies, maybe tomorrow.
Okay.
Um, I think I had my hardest time with this album and where to put it. Uh, because you said it perfectly. It's very early in their career, and I don't really think they had it all figured out yet. But in saying all that, I think there's some really charming stuff on this album. And again, this is not, and you said it perfectly, this is not a power pop band yet. And to me, what this sounds like is a late 60s psychedelic
Mhm.
garage band,
Yeah.
right? You named a whole bunch of bands, and I couldn't disagree with any of them, right? There's all those bands that were doing this sort of thing at the time. This is a product of that. They're working with Mal Evans and Tony Visconti, right? And it's like I hear little bits of kind of Beatles things. I hear the Pretty Things. I hear all these bands, but like the Fisherman is really cool, kind of folky pop, right? Dear
Mhm.
Angie, Think About the Good Times is kind of funky. Beautiful and Blue could have been on a Beatles album from that similar time
Mhm.
period. Great song. Seesaw Grandpa, loads of fun,
Mhm.
loads of fun. And then you got like I've Been Waiting, which is this kind of like weird, muscular, psychedelic rock. It's like, where'd that come from on this album, right? Sally Blue, total garage rock. Love it. Really good. I'm in Love is quirky pop. I mean, there's so much weird stuff on here that, like, on paper, you listen to it and you're like, okay, yeah, that's Badfinger,
Mhm.
but like baby Badfinger, right? They're still trying to figure their
Yeah.
way around here. I will say, um, Pete Ham's lead guitar work on this album is really, really good. Really,
Mhm.
really good. To me, out of all of their records, they've been compared to the Beatles so much. I hear more of the Beatles and that whole scene, like the British psychedelic pop scene, on
Mhm.
this album than any of the other ones. You hear little bits of Beatles on the next couple of albums, and especially because they work with George and they work with Paul and whatnot. But this is a product of its time. It's kind of to me an outlier in their catalog, but I think it's important in their history, and I find it a very charming record as kind of like not half. What's the word I'm looking for? It's Badfinger, but they're still figuring it out. They haven't really,
Yeah.
it hasn't all clicked with them yet. And there's no Joey on this album. So there's that as well. But I kind of like it. I think it's pretty cool. So that's my number. So that's 6 and 5 for me. So off
I
to the
love
top.
it that you I love it that you rated it so high. And like
Yeah,
I
I
said, it
mean,
just
I
goes to
had it
show.
lower, Grant. I had it lower, and then I moved it up again. Then, like the last we were talking before we went on the air, I last weekend I made I just rearranged and did. I'm like, I'm not touching this list anymore
Yeah,
because
just
I tend to you tend to overthink it. And you're like, well, maybe this should go at number six and not number eight. It's like, oh, whatever. It's like at some point you just have to stop. You've got to stop.
but yeah, that's awesome. God,
Yeah.
darn, I love
All
it.
right, our top four. I think most of ours are well, the two.
No, no, I haven't mentioned one that you
Yep, it's going to
mentioned.
be half and half for us. We got so two of my top four you've already cast aside. So, but then the other two obviously had to be here. So we're going to agree on two of them. We'll see where they
Yeah.
all sit.
I do want to say one thing before we go to my ranking. You did mention Lonely You, and I've written in my notes that I think that is the highlight of that Badfinger album. I think that's the best track. I think
Should
it's
have been a
beautiful.
big hit, I
It
think.
should have been a big hit. It's classic Badfinger. The piano, the guitar playing, and I put Pete Ham at his best.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one.
Kind of raspberry-like. I think it's brilliant, and it should have been a big hit. So I just wanted to say that because I did have it written down, but you know. All right, here we go to our next, my 4 and 3.
Numero quattro.
All right, I'm gonna go with head first for my number 4.
There you go.
This is the album. Joey Mullen's gone. He's done. They brought in keyboardist, guitarist Bob Jackson on this record. And like I said, this was recorded at Beatles at Abbey Road in London, which that's a good sign. This is the 8th album under the contract with Warner Brothers. And of course, it got shelved, and I already talked about why. What we ended up getting when this came out in 2000 was the rough mix made by Phil McDonald, which was the engineered Apple. Rough mix, but what if this would have had a really proper mix? But I still like what it is. And I think Bob Jackson was a good replacement. The reason Bob is on this record, Pete Ham had quit. And they brought in Bob, and Joey quit, got in Bob, and then they brought Joey back in. I mean, sorry, Pete came back in. They're just playing musical chairs here.
Yeah, people are coming and going. Yeah.
I mean, they said, well, if you're going to do an album, you have to have Pete on the record. And so Pete came back, and, you know, they got him back on. And he decided to stay. I think this record is great. Now, if anybody knows Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, they were the producers on this. First 2 Kiss albums, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep.
It doesn't sound like Hotter Than Hell. I will say that. But I dig this record because it sounds like, oh, well, you know, it's like one of those records they're going, you know what, we're this far in our Warner Brothers catalog. It hasn't been an easy ride, but we're going to do what we can do and put out a great record, even though this came out so quickly from the last record. Lay Me Down, a great rocker to open side 1 by Pete Ham. Holy crap. I love it. Turning Around, killer guitar. And I must mention that Bob Jackson does do some lead vocals on here. And I think Bob's great. I think he's a good addition to this record. It is what it is. Maybe Bob kind of ignited them a bit, brought them some new life. I don't know. Obviously, Joey Mullen wasn't happy. He quit.
Yep.
Maybe they needed Bob on this. I like what he's bringing to the table. Keep Believing, yet another stellar Pete Ham track. I don't think you liked it so much, but I dig it. The slide, it sounds kind of Beatley. The slide guitar reminds me of George Harrison's type of playing. That's probably giving me that Beatles vibe, but I don't have a problem with it. You've got Rockin' Machine, which you have Tom Evans really complaining about the woes of the music industry. He's going to start doing that on this record. There's a lot of bitching and complaining on this record, but you know, they're not happy. They're not a happy band. And Tom Evans really is not happy. Let's see. I must mention Rock and Roll Contract. Again, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Tom Evans, one of his best tracks. And I think, like I said, this came out later on a later record, but I like this version because it's just gritty. It's dirty. It's down. It's just in your face. And it's one of the best rockers that Badfinger's ever done. And, you know, Tom Evans, when he's unhappy, seems to produce some good rockers. So I will hand him that. And another example on this record's Hey, Mr. Manager. More power pop from Tom Evans, and he's angry at the management. It's a beautiful classic of a blend between Tom and Pete Ham. I think it's wonderful. It's Beatley, but it rocks. I love this. I would have loved to had this even a better mix of it. And I don't know what happened to the tapes. I know all we have, evidently, is this rough mix. Where are the master tapes? Why can't we go back and remix this properly?
It's almost like someone doesn't want to find them and have to spend the money to do all this, right?
Maybe they got destroyed in the Warner Brothers. I don't know.
That could very well be, yeah.
The other thing I want to say that I like about this is it's a very live sounding record. And for a band really in turmoil and a mess, it sounds like they're still in control. I think it's a cohesive record. And I think it's holding together better than any. This is probably a leap, but I swear I love this record. I think it holds together than any Badfinger record outside of Wish You Were Here at this period. I love it. It really seems to be Tom Evans' album. You know, they kind of fluctuate. Here's a Pete record, here's a Tom record. Oh, well, this is a Joey Mullen record, but this is really a Tom Evans record, and I think he shines here, and I think it's phenomenal. We are lucky that it got a 2000 release, I think. I'll take it for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
A gem from the vaults, right?
gem from the vault. So, that being said, I have not yet talked about Wish You Were Here.
That's right.
Which I think's brilliant. Chris Thomas is back in the fold. Came out in 1974. This is the second and last album, technically, to be released by Warner Brothers. Now, I mentioned this before. All these Chris Thomas must be a chameleon, Pete, because I can't track him down as a particular, you know, I don't know if he really has a sound.
No, he really doesn't. Yeah, I don't think he does.
You know, think about the Sex Pistols, think about the Pretenders. You would never know Chris Thomas had a hand in that. And he's really like that on the Badfinger stuff. Like I said, this was withdrawn from the market, from the record stores 7 weeks after it was released because of that lawsuit with Warner Brothers. This record sounds way more focused. I don't know what happened to him between the Badfinger album and here, but this record just sounds way more focused. The production is tighter. When you listen to it, it leaps out of the speakers. This is Mullen and Ham's album. There's only one Tom Evans track on here. I don't know. Must be saving it up for Head First. But I think what Mullen and Ham bring to this, it's great. Let's see, what tracks should I mention? You get a chance. It's funny how they always lead off with like a 1-2 punch, you know. Just a Chance, Pete Ham, great. You're So Fine, Mike Gibbons, the drummer, provides a track, and he's number 2 in the lineup. Like to see it. I don't have any issue with Mike's stuff. He's a minor player, but what he produces, I don't have an issue with. Got to Get Out of Here, Joey Mullen. I think Joey, I wrote on here that with each record, I don't know if you hear this, but I think Joey grows. You know, you've got Tom Evans and you've got Pete Ham, which I think as writers, they're solidified. I think Joey Mullen with each record kind of gets better. That's kind of with Ass why I kind of rated it lower, because when I look at Joey's work that came later, he's a lot better. He's great on this record. His songwriting's really great. No One Knows, power pop greatness, ladies and gentlemen. Big, thick production, shimmering guitars, catchy chorus, and top-notch Pete Ham songwriting. Dennis, bit of a Beatles vibe, very majestic production with thick, bold vocals, a highlight for me. I can only describe this track as pure Badfinger. I love it. Again, Pete Ham bringing it all the way. In the meantime, some other time, which is a Gibbons Mullen collaboration. We talked to how great this is. This is prog. It's like Supertramp, mix a little 10cc on it, put a little Badfinger in there, and you have perfection. It's a joy. The strings on this album sound great.
Yep.
It's great. This is great. A lot of people rank this as their best Badfinger album. I could have, but not today. Love Time, Mullen, beautiful Mullen ballad. Mullen, for being a rocker, can really write a ballad. I'm telling you, he's come into his own on this record. King of the Low, Tom Evans track, but we only got one Tom Evans track, but it's a beauty. Very Beatlesque. Got the Fender Rhodes going on there. I like it. Welcome. I've named every damn track on here. Might as well name the last one. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Should I Smoke? Pete Ham, Joey Mullen track. It reminds me of The Move. Reminds me of Roy Wood. The guitars sound great and they ring out, and it's a great collaboration between Ham and Mullen. I think this album is a gem. It could be my number one on someday. It just depends. But today, I don't think it reaches quite the heights of our next two records.
I hear you. Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that. So,
There you go.
all right. My number four, surprise, surprise, Magic Christian Music. So
All
second
right.
album, first album under the Badfinger name, again, Mal Evans and Tony Visconti are still here. Paul McCartney kind of hanging
Yeah.
out with the band, right? Doing a little producing and giving them Come and Get It, which I think is an absolutely terrific single.
Terrific.
As Grant mentioned, you got kind of half of this album is new tracks, the other half is kind of redone, remixed stuff from the first album. Uh, Based on how much I like the new stuff, I almost wish that the whole album was all new stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
first, the reworkings and remixing are great, but man, the other stuff is just so strong. I mean, Rock of All Ages is very cool. And there's that honky tonk piano kind of creeping in, right? Some really good lead guitar. Beautiful in Blue is
Mhm.
awesome. I mean, Carry On Till Tomorrow is like this dreamy, folky, almost like Simon and Garfunkel like tune. Really, really cool. Crimson Ship, really good song. I like a lot of it here. I think it's really good. And I think for me, I appreciate this more as a fully realized Badfinger album than the Ivy's album, right? Which I think and I
Yeah.
think that was the intent of the whole thing. So that's my number four. So surprise, surprise, my number three. And I'm one of those guys that I had to stop
Oh,
everything in me to put this at number one, and that's Ass. I really like Ass a lot.
okay.
And I'm talking about the album, right? Not
Hey, I'm not judging. Hey, but the album cover's a bit questionable. You have to
It's a
admit.
little bizarre, yes. And apparently there are some connotations about that, and leading the animal with the carrots, and it's like, come over here, yeah, try this, whatever. It's supposedly it's another dig at the record label, so I don't know, whatever. I agree with you. I think because Todd only produced a portion of it, there's a lack of consistency, I think, across the board on how the album sounds. However, I think there's some great tracks on here. I mean, Apple of My Eye is just terrific. Love it. Great typical Badfinger high energy pop song. Love it. I love Getaway. I love Icicles. The Winner is more of a hard rock. And I think for me, the album starts off a pretty rocking album.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love so much about it. I think it's fairly consistently, at least the first half, a pretty good hard, like poppy hard rock album. I like it a bit. I love Blind Owl. I think that's really good. Constitution is like bluesy rock, right?
Mhm.
It's the same band, right? It's like weird. It's kind of like this almost doesn't sound like it. And then you got when I say yeah, that's kind of more of that country rock thing. I'm not as crazy about that. Cowboy is similar, but I really like I Can Love You, and I think Timeless is kind of dreamy, proggy, atmospheric type of thing. So for me, the only tracks I don't really care too much about are When I Say and Cowboy. The rest of it I love. I really think it's
Mhm.
good. So and I
I
think
love
it's
it.
one of their better rockin' albums. But again, maybe that's because it's mostly a Joey album, whatever, but I don't mind it. I think it's good. And yeah, now let's talk about those top two, right? It's
Well, I
good.
do have a question,
Yeah.
and I'm going to propose my question out right before we get to our top two. Do you think, you know how they were so connected with Apple? There could always had that Beatle tie-in,
Yeah.
and Ass was the last Apple record. And I just wanted to mention before we go on is that there were no other acts on Apple that produced anything other than the solo Beatles material.
Right. Right.
Badfinger is probably one of those only bands that you can really name off the top of your tongue that were on Apple. There were other acts on Apple. No one really,
No one
Jackie
knows their kids.
Lomax, no
Yeah.
one really knows or cares. Do you think that that hindered their career? Do you think that having that Beatles tie-in was detrimental to their career or it benefited Badfinger? I'm just curious how you look at it.
Uh
Do you think being so close and being on Apple was, I think it almost was a curse. I don't
I
think they
think
could,
so too, because did anybody want another Beatles?
I don't think they
They were
did at the
so
time.
beloved at the time. I don't think anybody did. It's like you either give me the Beatles or I want something different. And you have to wonder how much of their um, Beatles similarities was really due
Mhm.
to them or to Apple wanting another Beatles on the label, right?
I exactly nailed it. I think you nailed it. I was just curious. I think it was detrimental. And I
Yeah,
think it was too late by the time they got to Warner Brothers. I think it was too late, you know.
Because I mean, how many times have you talked to people who were maybe of a certain age at the time? You know, you and I were obviously a little bit young at the time, but you know, when No Matter What came out,
Yeah.
I've talked to so many people who are older than us who have been like, yeah, we all thought that was a brand new Beatles song, and then we found out it wasn't. We were like, oh, okay. So is that a curse, right? So all of a sudden, do you discount it because it's not what you thought it was? It may be really good. So I don't know.
Timing's everything. Look at Big
Yeah,
Star.
yeah,
They love the Beatles. They really wanted to continue off where it left off. Couldn't get noticed. And Badfinger and Big Star, I very closely together. I mean, obviously, Badfinger was more successful than Big Star, but I mean, I
yeah,
think it was timing. I think people still had the Beatles. You could still have a John Lennon record, a Paul McCartney record. People were,
100%.
they just didn't need another Beatles record, I don't think. I'd
Well,
like
'cause
to
you
know
look
what
at all
people,
these bands, right? I mean, we could do a whole show on this for
we
crying
could
out
do a
loud.
whole show on.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Raspberries too, right? They weren't the world's biggest band either.
I
But the
think
music, I mean, you look at the music of all these bands we're talking about right now, should have been huge, every one of them. And why weren't they? Right? Why weren't they? Was it
timing.
too similar to a band that people could not part with, right?
Yes,
Couldn't
I think
accept
so.
that they were no longer around.
I think so.
What a
That's
concept. We've never
interesting.
talked about that before. It's almost like that's like the forbidden discussion. It's like when
No,
you
I think
really
it needs
think
to be
about it,
discussed. I think it's a great discussion. It has a lot to do with it.
because it's so true, right? It's
Yeah.
like, you know, we all want to come up with different reasons why some of the bands we just mentioned didn't become enormous bands. It's not that they didn't have great songs and produce great albums, and none of them had particularly long careers. But
No.
is it because that people were not ready to let go of the Beatles, and they didn't want another band that sounded like the Beatles? It's either the real thing or nothing else. I don't know. For those who are watching this program right now, who are maybe in the age group that Grant and I are talking about. So, you know, we're both in our late 50s here. So obviously we're talking about people who are maybe 65 and older, right? Who were
Mm,
teenagers or late teens, early 20s when these albums were coming out in the early mid 70s.
yeah.
Do you think the reason why some of these bands like Badfinger and Big Star and the Raspberries and whoever else didn't become mega stars was because people perceived them as being too similar to what the Beatles were doing? They were not willing to accept anything but those four guys. It's a great discussion, I think, and a great concept. And I think we're spot on the money here. It has to
A
be.
great concept. I'd love to hear what people have to say.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what order you're going to pick yours. I'm just going to go.
Okay. Go.
I would assume we're on the same page, but I don't know. My number two, and I'm going to say if your number two is my number two, we could do this together.
Yeah.
My number two is No Dice. Okay, November of 1970, Jeff
Very good.
Emerick, Mal Evans produced. Uh, First album with Joey Mullen on
Yep.
it back. And this is, like I said, this is where things came together. Tom Evans switched from rhythm guitar to bass. And I must say that Tom Evans is a bass player. Yeah, I'm glad he made the switch because he's a great bass player.
Look at that
This
hair. Jesus, look
got
at
good
that.
hair. They peaked at number 28 on this record, and the reviews for this record were positive. Um, let's see, what did I write? Oh, yeah, it starts out with that Pete Ham rocker. I can't take it. It sounds so energetic and
Yeah.
fresh. Badfinger has arrived. Um, see where I wrote on here where the Ivies and Magic Christians seem balanced between members. Pete Ham really sticks out on this record with No Matter What, which is power pop classic. Without You, absolutely brilliant. Midnight Caller, I think, is another brilliant Pete Ham song. His material just seems so superior here. It makes for a killer side one. Does that mean that that side one is heavily loaded? I
Yeah.
don't
But
know. Just know.
every track is really good. Yeah.
But no matter what is what, when you think power pop, if it says what, oh Grant, what's power pop? Listen to No Matter What. That's a perfect example of power pop. That defines what power pop is. But this record has lots of ballads and rockers and pop. Better Days is an Evans Mullen track. I think that's a great collaboration. I love that track. Um, the other thing that I wrote on here, and I'll let you talk. Paul may have offered come and get it to them. And I think that might have talk about being stereotyped. Oh my God, you're trying to be the Beatles. Oh, you need Paul McCartney to give you a song. Oh, I could see that. But you look at no matter what, you look at the songwriting on here. Pete Ham is a songwriter. I know I'm like a Pete Ham fanboy today, but he can prove that he can write anything as good as a lot of Paul McCartney, for God's sakes. That might be out there, but he was an awesome artist. He proves it on this record. No matter what, without you stand the test of time on this record. But this is my number two. I'm gonna Pete, go ahead and talk about it. You're probably gonna say the same things I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great album, and it's almost like you put it at number two, and you're like, God, this could be number one. You know,
It could be number one, but
yeah. I mean, just look at how many times "Without You" was redone by other people and to much more success, right? But a great song is a great song, you know. Bloodwind is good. Better Days. I mean, great guitars on that. Really good. Watford John, more of that kind of like boogie thing. I mean, this
mhm,
Love Me Do, really good stuff. I Don't Mind. How about the sax and I Can't Take It? That's great.
yeah.
Really good stuff. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't if anybody said they prefer this one over the other one we're going to mention in a second, I'd be like, okay, I can agree with that because they're
Mm,
both equally great. And if you
mhm,
can only have two Badfinger albums in this whole catalog, these two are the ones, pretty
mhm,
much. But yeah, I tell you, no matter what, is one of the great pop songs of the 70s,
mhm.
without a doubt. Without a,
It's it's magical.
yeah, it's real.
Lightning in a bottle, ladies and gentlemen. That's what that is.
Yep, yeah, for sure.
It's great.
And of course, number one
Is
can only be,
this gem
yep, straight up,
straight up.
straight up.
And it's funny for this being number one, and this is kind of when turmoil started.
Yeah.
You've got Jeff Emmerich starting out with it. Um, and then they brought George Harrison in. George had to go work on the concert for Bangladesh.
Yeah.
They brought in Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren basically salvaged everything. Didn't get any credit for co-producing any of that other stuff. George Harrison didn't even give him a nod, you know. But Todd took what George had done. George didn't finish anything. And I don't know how much Jeff Emmerich did. I think his stuff was more finished, but George's production, he didn't finish any of it. Todd came in and fixed it. Well, finished it up.
I think Jeff did like a pretty full pass through, but they weren't overly happy with it. So then they
They
kind
used
of like
some of it, but
redid it again, right? So that there, because there's recordings of both productions out there.
well, I wrote down here in my note, 12 tracks were recorded with Emmerich. They were getting ready to go out on a tour and they felt rushed and they weren't happy with it. But I think Todd could look at it. It helps to have that other producer to look at it and go, oh, we can use this one. This one's not bad. We can work with that.
Just to give everybody, I know it's probably hard to read, but this CD edition I have has the
I think I got the
four,
same one.
13, yeah. So it's Money, Flying, Name of the Game, Suitcase, and Perfection. You get the original Jeff Emmerich versions on here, and then you get the Todd version. So yeah, it's kind of again another messy situation. Did this band ever not have messy situations? It seems like they didn't for the most part, right?
Yeah, and the band, yeah, true. The band did not like Todd Rundgren. They didn't like the way he ran sessions.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's a taskmaster. But what he got out of the band, brilliant. Um, I wrote here, take it all. Pete Hammond is his best. Strong vocals, excellent songwriting, organ, good opener, baby blue. Well, baby blue, for God's sakes. The guitar tone on this is incredible.
Yeah.
Power pop greatness, great song. Fuzzy, the melodies are great. The harmonies are great. I love it. Money, already the song Money. Tom Evans already all upset about the way things are going, talking about the woes of money issues. Already Tom's disgruntled. Um, Flying is very Beatley. You think Flying from the Beatles? No, different. Great collaboration between Evans and Joey Mullen.
Really good song.
The thing about this thing is Todd must be good at sequencing because I think this record is sequenced very well.
Yeah.
And I think Todd's work is incredible, a balance of everything. That's the thing. What makes this record so great, Pete, is that there's a balance.
Yep.
between all the band members, the way the songs are set up, the type of song. Todd is he's good at arranging. He knows how, he's brilliant. We all know that. But I think the song sequencing production on this is perfect. You don't hear that stamp. This is not next position please where you're listening to it and go, oh God, that's Todd Rundgren. I don't really hear a Todd stamp on here. Um, I think it blends well with George Harrison stuff, the Jeff Emmerich stuff. I think it blends well. A Mullen, like I wrote on here, he's getting better as a songwriter. I Die Babe, Suitcase, Sweet Tuesday Morning. Good songs. He gets better with every record. But I do think maybe it's the George Harrison thing. Feels much more Beatle influenced than the previous records to my ears. You might
Yeah.
hear it differently.
I would agree. I would agree.
Okay. But day after day, perfection. George Harrison plays the slide solo. Obviously, sounds just like George. It is George.
It is George. So do you
Uh,
think you were talking about track sequencing before? Do you think it's kind of odd, and maybe they didn't know because there was so many strong tracks on here? Do you think it's kind of odd that they saved day after day to so late in the album on side two instead of putting it on side one after
no, put
day?
it late on side two to bring you into the next record. It makes you go, my God, that's a great track. Oh, I
Well,
can
because
hardly
side
wait
one
for the
is so
next
strong, right?
record.
So it's almost like it's not needed on side one, right?
Right. It's beautifully put together. I think this record is. And I think George Harrison. I think Todd Rundgren coming in, taking what George had done with Day After Day. Beautiful. He finished it. It sounds great. This is a finished record. It is brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah. Interesting how like both this one and our number two, each one had such a outstanding single on it, right? But none of the rest of the songs were really pushed at all by the record label.
No.
Kind of odd, right? Because that if you go later in the decade, that kind of shit never happened because if they had one pretty big hit on the album, well, let's find another one on the album and let's find another one on the album. They didn't do that for either of these albums. They didn't
It's
push anything
Apple.
else.
I don't think they pushed it.
No, no. It's
Had
weird.
they started out on Warner Brothers, it might have been a different thing. I don't, it's just Badfinger is just a tragedy.
Yeah,
It's a
it really is.
tragedy. But what we're left with, look at how we rank these. We're all over the place,
Yeah,
except for our one and two. And that just goes to show everyone what a great catalog it is,
yeah, yeah.
you know?
Good stuff. So we were talking quite a bit of this before we started taping.
Mm.
What we really want to know from folks watching, we really want to know from the people who have just finished watching this episode, but really have never investigated this band much at all. If you decide to go and do so now, we really would love for you to come back and in the comments section, let us know what you think of some of these albums, what you thought of some of these albums. And
Mhm.
if your newfound introduction to Badfinger was a positive thing, or maybe not so much, and not so much, we get it. Not everybody likes everything. That's what's kind of always interesting to find out. It's cool to know the Badfinger aficionados how they rank the catalog in comparison to how we just did. But I think
Mhm.
we're always more interested to see how newbies to these bands feel after hearing such in-depth discussion on them and then actually go out and listen to them and say, hey, I agree with Grant, or I agree with Pete, or they were both off their rockers, or hey, they were both spot on, or whatever it might be. And I really dig this band. I can't believe I never listened to them before. That's kind of what we're more interested, I think.
Right.
So yeah, but for those of you who are fans, rank them in the comments as you like them. Be interesting to see how these kind of play out across most of the folks watching. And for all the new folks to Badfinger, go investigate. Let us know what you think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. So Grant and I are going to be doing more of these in the future. So over the next couple of months, we've got, of course, we promised the bread ranking for all of you kind of, God, what do you even call bread? Pop
Uh,
band?
I'd say they're a pop band.
Yeah. They're a pop band.
There are some power pop elements.
There is some power
There's
pop. There's some straight pop. There's some yacht rock. There's even a little bit of hard rock. God, they got a
they've got
couple
hard
songs in their
rock.
catalog that rock pretty damn hard. So that's coming up. And then a lot of people have been asking for Firefall.
Firefall, for God's sake.
And we're like, so we're gonna do that. So I've always kind of dug Firefall. Again, another band that kind of doesn't really sit too well in any one place. They're kind of a pop band. They're kind of a yacht rock band. They're kind of like a soft rock band. They're kind of like a country rock band. And they do a little bit of everything. So I've always kind of dug them. Another band that has a couple of really big hits that are great songs. So we'll be doing that. So look for those two. Go ahead.
And who is talking Firefall?
Nobody.
Nobody.
Yeah. These forgotten bands of the 70s, right? Yeah, nobody's talking Firefall.
No.
It's yeah.
Hey, but the whole thing is for me, I'm not that familiar with it. But I'm gonna learn, and it's all about hearing these bands and discovering these bands. And it's great hearing some of these records for the first time because there's so many gems out there that you might not have found. And you'll sit there and go, oh my God, this record's really great.
Yeah.
So I love this whole process. I love just, Firefall. I'm game. Let's do Firefall.
Yeah.
Got to work on it a little bit, but man,
Yeah.
I'm game.
So yeah, so you're gonna see all sorts of weird stuff over the next couple of weeks and months, right? For those of you who watched last week's show, of course, I reviewed German thrash act Creator. I've got Destruction coming up, Sodom coming up. We've talked about Bread. We talked about Firefall. There's a whole bit. We've got Yob for those people who are into psych and doom and stoner, and there's all sorts of stuff across all sorts of genres coming up in the weeks and months ahead. So stay tuned for all of it. And Grant, you want to give a plug to what's going on over on the Contrarians?
On the Contrarians, oh my God, we've got all kinds of things in the works. But I do always want to plug
all
this.
Sorts of delights for you over there. You sound like a mad scientist over here.
I just edited the video today, and I just edited it, and I can't remember what it was about. That's how much is going on the Contrarians. But Wednesday, everyone, we do the live chat Wednesday at 7. I can always guarantee you about this 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on the Contrarians, where we're ranking album covers. We're talking about all kinds of things. But come into the chat. We like to hear from you, and it's always fun. On Grant's Rock Warehouse, what's going to air? Well, it will air last night when this airs. We did one and done on the band Life, Sex, and Death, which I had never heard this record. And like I just said, I like listening to these records or these bands, these artists that slip through the cracks. Why didn't these guys make it? So we're going to talk about that, and that'll be up on my Grant's Rock Warehouse. I highly recommend it. Check that out. I really dig this record. So
how many folks watching this right now saw that CD cover and said, holy shit, I remember seeing that in the music stores back in the early 90s, right? I was one of them. Grant and I were talking before we started recording today. He pulled it up. I'm like, I remember that. I never listened to it, but I remember seeing it.
But I remember.
Yeah.
And Tim Derling and I just did a Loverboy ranking. And Loverboy, you might be surprised. There's a lot of great Loverboy albums in their later career, much like this one that I was talking to Pete about. This is a wonderful record. Came out I think in early 2000s. I can't remember right off. It's a big blur. Great record. But that's on my channel too, where Tim Derling and I ranked the catalog of Loverboy. So check that out. Awesome. But Contrarians always has something new, almost daily. So Martin's got a lot of ideas. I'll leave it at that.
He does.
He does.
Cool. What do we got going on here? Geez, it's Sunday. So tomorrow, no programming tomorrow except for the normal 9 o'clock show. But Tuesday, we've got In the Prague Seat. So stay tuned for that. And Wednesday, new album review day and all sorts of stuff the rest of the week. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you don't miss any of this stuff as it's being posted. And please do hit the like button before you leave. We greatly appreciate it. Till next week on Ranking the Albums, for Grant Arthur, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care.
See you, everybody.